Hello everybody, welcome to the South Australian Health and Medical Research Institute. My name is Dr. Michael Musker. I'm a Senior Research Fellow with the Wellbeing and Resilience Centre here at SAHMRI. I'm also a trainer for the Be Well Plan, and you can access that on bewellplan.com if you're interested in being part of that. I'll actually put that link to the Be Well Plan on the chat. So if you want to have a look at that sometime, maybe put it in your favorites and access it whenever you want to. You can also just Google SAHMRI Wellbeing and it'll come up with our centre and you'll be able to find out more information. To start with, I'd like to acknowledge and recognise and respect the traditional owners of this land that we're on here today. Just so happens that we're on the lands of the Kaurna people here in South Australia. And because this is a national event, I'm sure you want to pay respect to the people of the lands that you're on today. We also pay respect to their elders, past and present, and also emerging leaders. We have actually one of those on the talk today, and his name's Seth Westhead. He's actually part of our Wardley Paringa Centre here at SAHMRI. So this webinar has been put together by a collaboration of the SAHMRI Wellbeing and Resilience Centre, the Órama Institute for Mental Health and Wellbeing, and Breakthrough Mental Health Research Foundation for Men's Health Week. And it's been coordinated by two of our researchers here, which is Laura Lowe and Monique Newberry. So I want to thank them for putting all the speakers together and for all the hard work that they've done leading up to this event. And we have almost 300 people attending this event today, which is fantastic. So to start with, I just want to talk a little bit about the suicide rates in Australia, just to emphasize the importance of looking at men's health. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics actually published the 2018 suicide rates. And in Australia, there were 3,046 people committed suicide. Now, the astonishing fact is that 2,320 of them are males. So if we put that into a daily figure, there are around 8 people who commit suicide on a daily basis. And 6 of those 8 people are men. Hence the importance of getting men to talk about their mental health. Now, we've entitled this Men's Mental Health and Men's Health Week. But we mustn't forget the rest of our community, because mental health is important to the whole community, including our LGBTQI community, and also our rural communities and our cultural communities. So mental health has actually worsened more recently with the COVID crisis. And so men may well be suffering more than usual. So it's really important that we look after each other at this moment in time. Our own team, our research team here at SAHMRI, led by Joop Uchteren, has actually published a paper providing some data on how the health of the state is actually worsening. And we'll put the link of that up for you very soon. So as you'll hear today, a key problem with men is that they bottle things up. So men need to talk to someone, maybe a friend, a colleague, or a trusted family member. So just let them know how you're feeling and get some help. Again, you can also join our program, the Be Well program, at bewellplan.com. Again, we'll put the link for that for you. And if you find anything that triggers you today, anything that we're talking about, you can always phone Lifeline on 13 11 14. And again, we'll put that in the chat for you. So I'm actually honoured just to be part of this webinar today and to introduce 6 amazing guests who are leaders in promoting positive health in their respective fields. And they are shining lights around the pressures and strains of mental health issues. We'll hear some very personal perspectives. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Professor Murray Drummond, who is talking about the social construction of masculinity and mental health. And I've heard Professor Murray speak before, and he shows some amazing insights into people with sports and gender. Over to you, Professor Drummond.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Yes, it's a very important week with respect to men's health and in relation to mental health. So I often give a lot of presentations in relation to men's health with community groups and so forth, whether they be Lions clubs or Rotary clubs and so forth. And one of the first things that I do is I talk about masculinity. And I often entitle the presentation Masculinity May be a Health Hazard. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a brief overview, not just of mental health, but also some issues around physical health, because they all play into men's mental health and well-being ultimately. So what do we know? We know that Australian males' life expectancy is around about 5 to 6 years less than women. Now, I'm not trying to sort of pit men against women here, but it gives us a point of reference. So, for example, a male born in 2020, they can expect to live to around 80 years of age. A girl born in 2020, well, they can expect to live to around about 85 to 86 years of age. So, as you can see, there's a 5 or 6 year gap. And what we know is that men are likely to die from a range of causes. For example, if we look at that 15 to 24 year age group, the males are more than 3 times as likely to die in motor vehicle accidents than women. And again, we'll talk about the social construction of masculinity in a moment in relation to that. 4 times as likely to die of self-harm, which has already been alluded to. But interestingly, this data indicates that it's now extending up to that 30 to 40 year age group, and the most recent ABS data has indicated that it's now moving into the 45 to 55 year age group as well, which is quite significant. So middle-aged men, and I've been a big proponent of trying to research middle-aged. They're not old, they're not young, and yet they're often the group that are not thought about as much. Well, what about that 25 to 64 year age group? So the age group that's regarded as adulthood. We know that men have a death rate nearly twice that of women in the same range. And my argument is that it can be attributed largely to masculinity and the social construction of masculinity in contemporary Western society. For example, heart disease, 3.5 times higher. Well, we know that men, for example, eat more fast food. They eat more meat than women, which are higher in fats and so forth. And interestingly, the eating of meat for men has been socially constructed as a thing to do. Lung cancer, over 3 times higher. Again, men smoke more, but interestingly, they stop less. So women have this wonderful pivot point around the time of women, time of pregnancy, and having children and so forth, where they will stop smoking. Men, the fathers, often go outside. They continue to smoke, but they go outside. We know that motor vehicle accidents are 3 times higher. And again, we think about it. Men drive more, they drive faster, they have more powerful cars, and they often go on road trips with their mates far more than women do. So again, social constructionism plays into that. And we know that suicide, even in this age range, is 3.5 times higher. Again, which relates to mental health, which we'll talk about in a moment. Now, this is a quote that I often refer to, and it was written by an academic named Strodel in 1994. So have a think about this. This is what he said: men have more risky health attitudes and behaviours with respect to cardiovascular disease, and this may be related to the male gender role. That is, men may drink more alcohol, smoke more tobacco, have less healthy diets, engage in more type A behaviours, be less likely to take hypertensive medication and so forth, because these behaviours are in conformance with the male gender role. Men are socially expected to be self-reliant, tough, competitive and indestructible, while at the same time not admitting they have any weaknesses. Now, academics like myself who work in this area would argue that not a lot has changed. So let's have a look at the social construction of masculinity. So we know in contemporary Western society that men are supposed to be strong and tough. From a young age, boys are socialised not to adopt behaviours which are perceived as being feminine. Now, this is a very important point. So things like displaying, all of those sorts of things have an impact on a young child, on a boy. So think about these terms such as don't act like a girl, be a man, take it like a man, and don't cry, it's only pain, are commonly heard from an early age. And they're also heard from people who are in positions of social and cultural influence within that child's life. For example, fathers, uncles, brothers, those sorts of people. And from a sporting perspective, coaches. So they're very important points to remember. Therefore, boys are socialised into believing that to show emotions, such as pain related to injury or illness, is to display femininity. And significantly, mental health is also perceived as even more of a weakness, more so than physical pain. Okay, so that's a very important point. So what do we know? The social support network for men is not great. We do know that physical and mental health are closely related to the degree of social support. We know that social support can prevent premature mortality. We also know that, for example, women have this really good social support network and have less incidence of loneliness and attend medical practitioners far more often. Men tend not to have great social support networks, which is based on the way we have been socially constructed. We have fewer confidence than women, and we commonly report our wife or our partner as the only confidant, which is a significant point, particularly if the wife or partner, female partner, happens to die before they do. So, interestingly, they may have not been taught the skills involving nurturing and other social support attributes. Therefore, what happens? Well, we know that men often feel alone when they're confronted with a major health problem. Some men need guidance and encouragement to see a physician or a psychologist.
Just a minute left, Murray.
Yep. Some simply need to talk to others. Okay, so that is a very, very important point here. And some men feel so lonely and confused that self-harm becomes the only option. So talking to other men, being around other men, and being with other men to discuss these sorts of things is absolutely critical with respect to mental health. So we're currently doing a project at the moment, which has been funded by the Breakthrough Mental Health Foundation. And what we're doing is we're investigating young men's mental health in sporting settings, or what we call fraternal settings. We're investigating the way in which social structure and masculinity impacts young men's mental health, and how we can use these fraternal settings to promote mental health among young men. Our argument is that we have a captive audience with these men involved in these sporting settings. So why don't we use them to try and change the way they perceive themselves and the way they perceive masculinity and other men within society. And I know that this is going to be talked about in a moment with Zane and so forth in relation to his presentation coming up. So these are absolutely critical points. And finally, what we need to remember is the male macho image of "she'll be right, mate" should not be portrayed as the ideal masculine image anywhere. That support networks for boys and men should be enhanced, and that males should be taught to be able to speak to other males without feeling embarrassed. And we need to address this. And we need to address this through education from when a boy is very young, both at home and in schools and throughout society. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Murray Drummond, for that excellent insight into how young kids and males fare on the footy field, which is a great introduction to my next guest. And just before I do that, if you have any questions for Murray, please do put them in the chat. And if we don't get to answer them now, we'll certainly do a question and answer thing at the end. So we won't be doing immediate questions. We'll do them right at the end, and we'll try and address some of your questions. So you put them in the chat now, and we'll try and address them at the end. So without further ado again, now it takes a very brave person who's meant to be a macho person on the footy field. And we have a double McGarry medal winner today, Zane Kirkwood, who's going to be talking about navigating personal mental health experience on and off the footy field. Off you go, Zane.
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me, and just have a quick chat about, I guess, my own journey with mental health, and I guess navigating that with footy and sport. I guess early where it started for me was when I was a young fella in primary school. I was first told I had severe anxiety, which led to bouts of depression. So that was a pretty hard thing to hear as a young boy, going through school and growing up and everything changing. But I guess I found that sport, but footy in particular, was a good outlet for me. I was able to go and exercise, which is a really good way of dealing with anxiety. You can burn off some of that energy. And I really took a lot of pride in my footy throughout different stages of my life. Obviously, different anxiety things took over, and which led into pretty big bouts of depression. Unfortunately, it led me away from work, but footy was my constant throughout the whole journey. Till probably last year, which was probably my hardest year, both on and off the field, dealing with the anxiety and depression. Was first time in my life that I wasn't finding peace with playing footy, going through what I was going through when I normally would. But yeah, I definitely found that footy was a really good thing for me. And although anxiety and depression does get I guess a negative tone with it, I did find some positives with it as well. I became quite, I guess, obsessive with training, and I just wanted to make sure I was doing everything I could to achieve what I wanted to on the footy field, and with the team. But there was also times when you just felt like you never did enough, and that was quite a negative thing, where you're just constantly searching for the next thing, which is a tough thing to constantly do. So last year I'll talk a bit more about that. I guess, as I mentioned before, that footy probably was the first time last year that I didn't really enjoy it as much as I had in my previous years. I really struggled to go to training, to games. I really struggled with. I was trying new medications. I was trying different techniques to deal with my anxiety and depression, and that was all taking its toll on me. I removed myself from work, which made it tough. And I went to a conference last year and heard of someone was giving a talk and said that it was at Breakthrough, with John Mannion, that they really thanked them for their sport and coming out and to talk, because other than going to footy training, they don't leave home. They leave home twice a week to go to trainings and play games. And I was sitting there and I heard that, and that was just rang true with me, because at that stage, that was me. I left home 3 times a week to go to footy training, and then once on the weekend to play a game, and then go home and just go back into my shell. No one at footy knew what was going on for me. I kept that sheltered from them. Only my family and very close friends knew what was going on. I didn't feel like I wanted to burden anyone with what was going on. I just thought it'd be best if I could keep that to myself, which wasn't, at the time, it felt like I was doing the right thing, but it definitely wasn't the right thing to do. And as the weeks went on and found it to get harder and harder, it definitely exploded into something quite big. About halfway through last year, where I took some time away, I stepped down as captain. So I was captain of the footy club. I stepped down as captain and just needed to take a step back. And I eventually told the boys what was going on for me. What this led into was I had 2 panic attacks during a game of footy last year, in which I had to be removed from the group during a game, which was really embarrassing because no one really knew what was going on. That was really tough to handle, but I had great support from my footy teammates. They wrapped their arms around me, which was really needed. I couldn't thank them enough for the support that they gave me.
1 minute.
1 minute. Thank you. I went quick. Yeah, so the best thing for me was although I really struggled to leave home, was going to footy and being around. And although I didn't feel like going, and I guess I didn't really mentally and physically partake in a lot of stuff, just hearing a lot of the blokes joking around, that made me feel better. And even if it was for just 20 minutes that I felt better, I saw that as a positive. And yeah, I really appreciated everything that my footy teammates did for me, and had a lot of support from the footy club, the Sandful, Breakthrough, John Mannion, who runs that. They helped out with a bike ride I did last year, and they were great support throughout the whole year. And yeah, they do some really wonderful stuff in the mental health field. So yeah, that's a bit of my story. Yeah, so thank you for listening in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zane. That was a really good insight. And I think you've done so much to break down some of the stigma for mental health and people in sport. So well done to you. And you mentioned John Mannion a few times. I'd just like to thank John for helping set up this forum today from Breakthrough. So that's great. So thank you, Zane. Now, my next speaker is the South Australian Mental Health Commissioner, David Kelley. Now, I just want to tell you something about David. He's actually one of the founding people of the Wellbeing Resilience Centre at SAHMRI. Both David and his sister, Gabrielle Kelley, actually set up this centre around 6 years ago, and they worked really hard to make it what it is today. So firstly, I'd like to thank David for that. And I just want to introduce his talk, which is actions men can take to sustain their own well-being and to support the well-being of those around them. Thank you, David.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Look, as Mike mentioned, I've been certainly involved in the Wellbeing Resilience Centre and involved in working with and supporting vulnerable communities for all of my career. Well, that's been young people who've been traumatised by domestic and sexual violence, or whether it's been working with older people who've been, I guess, abused through their experiences. That has tended to be my work over the journey. Of course, across this, I've worked with lots of different men, and one of the things that's always been challenging about engaging with men is what are the motivations that support them to change? And frequently, what I've noticed over my career has been that quite often it's a crisis that needs to occur in a man's life that will be the catalyst for change. And I guess I didn't really understand that until I experienced my own crisis and had to, I guess, make sense of that in my own life. So for me, this started about 20 years ago. I had a young family. I was working in a senior management role in a large organisation, managing a team of more than 50 people, big budgets. And all of my energy was going into my family and my work. I really wasn't taking care of myself. I was drinking too much and I wasn't exercising enough. So then my crisis occurred. My wife was diagnosed with a really serious illness and she was hospitalised for long periods of time and was then recuperating for long periods of time. And all of a sudden, I was working full-time, more than full-time, looking after 2 children under 5, and I was really struggling. So for me, I was exhausted and I felt numb. I was really disconnected from my emotions. And I started smoking again. I was still drinking too much. And I really felt like my decision making at work was just, was really suffering. So when the opportunity came up for me to take a separation package from that particular job, I took it because I knew that something needed to change in my life. Now, of course, hindsight's a wonderful thing. And what I couldn't see at the time was that I was actually seriously depressed. And it wasn't until I had been on antidepressants for a few months that I could actually make sense of what was going on for me and identify what was important for me in my life. Now, of course, change isn't a singular event, and it's not as I had a grand master plan for how I was going to live my life, but over a period of time, I began to make changes in my life that were important to me and important to my family. Once again, with the benefit of hindsight, I can see how the changes that I made to improve my mental health and well-being roughly aligned with a framework called 5 Ways to Wellbeing. Now, a lot of you hopefully will be familiar with the 5 Ways to Wellbeing framework. It was developed by the New Economics Forum in the UK, and it's a really simple evidence-based framework that helps serve as a roadmap for both personal and community wellbeing. And it's comprised of 5 elements. Be active, connect with others, keep learning, take notice, and give. So what's happened for me over the last 2 decades really is that these 5 prescriptions have been a really important roadmap for me as I've tried to live a life that had more well-being and was better for my own mental health and for the health of my family. The first of these elements was about being active, and that's the one that I jumped on most. So for me, I started swimming again. I started swimming in the ocean. Now, back in the 1930s, a Danish writer called Isaac Dinesen wrote the following. He wrote that the cure for everything is salt water, sweat, tears, or the sea. So I really took this motto to heart, and I now swim every day. I'm fortunate enough to live at the beach, and I swim every day. It's part of my routine. It's a habit. Some might say it's an obsession of mine, but it makes me feel good. Now, it's really cold at the moment, but what the cold water does, it releases endorphins, so that when I get out of the water, I absolutely feel on top of the world. So this is something that I feel really strongly about, and it's part of my life. What's connected to this is the notion of taking notice, of being mindful. So when I'm swimming, I'm in nature. I'm mindful of what's going on around me, and I'm conscious all the time of every breath that I take. But this has also enabled me to adopt a much more intentional and mindful approach to my work. A lot of the work that I do now with organisations is around coaching and mentoring. So I find now that this approach of taking notice, being more mindful, means that I'm much more grounded in my work. And one really important thing, I think, for men is that I listen now much more than I speak. The next point that's part of the 5 Ways to Wellbeing is about connecting with others. And this plays out for me in a number of ways. Making time to be with the people I care about is the most important thing of my life. And when I did take that separation package all those years ago, what I knew was most important to me was being a great father and a great husband. So I did change my life. I made a decision not to seek out any more senior management roles, managing big teams and managing huge budgets. And I decided to work for myself. And what that meant was that I could organise my work around the needs of my children. And this was so important to me. It was so important to them. And what it means now is that all this time I've spent with them every day for the last 25 years, I think is the foundation of the amazing relationship that I have with my kids now. But it was also about reconnecting with my friends. As was pointed out earlier, sometimes our relationships with our friends as men can suffer. We don't put as much time in. So I made really conscious decisions that I wanted to re-establish and re-innovate those relationships with my male friends. So I make time to do that. And one of the ways I do that is related to another of the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which is about continuing to keep learning. I've put a lot of energy into that, and what I've found over time is that my interest in learning now is in part to get me out of my head and into my hands. And so one of the things I do with my friends is I've started learning how to make wine.
Yeah, David.
Thanks very much, Mike. So every year we get together, we pick grapes and we make wine together. And it's a fantastic experience. We get a great reward at the end. The final point that I want to make is about giving. One of the really important things I think for men about reframing masculinity is the notion of service to others. I've worked with a lot of men who've lived in really challenging communities where turning the other cheek just was not an option. So helping those men to reframe masculinity by thinking about how they could serve others, set their own needs aside and think about others first is a really important strategy to help reframe masculinity. It's been part of my life for the whole way through. The final point I want to make is that, of course, there is a caveat here. I'm privileged. I'm white, I'm male, I'm educated, I have access to work. I know that for lots of men, it's not so easy. So I really want to encourage us all to think about what that means for men who don't have access to the sort of privileges that some of us do, that have to think about masculinity in the context of living in challenging and difficult situations. I'll leave that with you. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much, David. Look, it's great to know that you are the Mental Health Commissioner for South Australia, especially with your lived experience, and that's what's needed in that role. Look, it was really heartwarming to hear your personal experience and you to really be open about your mental health, so thank you for that. And if you have any questions for David, please do put them in the chat and we might review those at the end. We may get the opportunity to ask David those. So thanks very much, David. And now I'd like to introduce my next speaker, Professor Paul Ward. So Paul is the head of Public Health and Medicine at Flinders University. And he has a particular interest in the medical profession and in how they're faring in their mental health. So his talk today is the lived experience of mental health issues and research on suicide prevention in doctors. Thanks very much, Paul.
Thanks, Michael. So, like Murray, I've got this really odd title of professor, and when I'm asked to talk about things, I'm normally asked to talk about my research and about big words and big books that I've read and all sorts of those kind of things. And so, you know, as Michael said, I do lots of research on all sorts of things, and one of the things I do research on is suicide prevention. I guess what makes that particularly important for me and for Men's Health Week is that I'm a person who's tried suicide a few times. And I think, you know, I'm a relatively young, 48, but 5 years ago when I first tried suicide, I was 43. So I'm a relatively young professor. I was a professor before I was 40. I've got 3 kids. I live by the beach. I'm originally from Manchester. I now live in Adelaide. I live by the beach. I live in Australia. I'm apparently living the high life. I've got it all. You know, I've got the kids. I've got the everything. And then I was 43. My youngest was 3-ish at the time. Shit happened in my life. I didn't have a clue how to deal with it. And I thought that my only option was to take myself out of it. I was in a hopeless position, felt in a hopeless position, take myself out of it, doctor shopping, all those things, and tried suicide. Woke up in chains after I'd been taken to hospital, taken to a psychiatric unit, provided with lots of different coloured meds, kept in there for 2 weeks, which is the normal process, sent out to go on my merry way with no idea of change, no idea of what I would do differently, and certainly no idea that I wanted to be back on the earth. So my only thought was, how do I do it better next time? So within about a couple of weeks, I was back in the same psychiatric unit. I was back in the same psychiatric unit a few weeks afterwards because I was in a coma for quite a long time this time, having thought that I'd done it better. And as far as I thought, I hadn't. So I was then discharged again after 2 weeks. This was between Christmas and New Year. This time, thankfully, in Adelaide, we have a particular what's called step up, step down service in Noarlunga, which I was sent to, which was my saviour. Throughout the time in acute care, I hadn't thought about why I was doing this or how I might change or how things might become better. I was then looked after by 2 male psychiatric nurses in this particular service who got it. They just got it. They had gone through their own experiences of mental illness and suicide attempts many years ago, which made made them want to go to nursing, to go into psychiatric nursing, and to support blokes like me. Blokes who just hadn't got a clue how to deal with stuff at the time. And they really supported me to figure out, did I really want to be on the earth? Why did I want to be on the earth? What have I got to live for? All those things. And you know, I think it's for outsiders, it's this, well, you've got everything to live for. You're a professor, you earn a lot of money, you live by the beach, you've got kids. What the hell are you doing thinking that it's okay to try to kill yourself? But however, my own mental health wasn't in a place where I thought that I wanted to be on the earth. And for whatever reason, the second time I went into a cave, took lots of meds with me and lots of alcohol, and a woman the next day found me walking a dog, totally by chance, found me. And I guess the whole point of saying this isn't to say, oh, poor me, this is to say that I think it's really important to be able to kind of destigmatize, to kind of normalize, to kind of say, you know, people, men or women, but this is Men's Health Week, men of all different descriptions, of all different variations, of all different types, and you know, for me, professors, need all sorts of stuff. We all need people to talk to. We all need a shoulder to cry on. We all need whatever it is that we need. So, you know, I take it upon myself to make sure that students I work with, my kids, so I've been on television talking about suicide, my own suicide, and my kids know that I tried to commit suicide, and it's really important that they know that they have got someone else to talk to, that I can make sure they've got people around them for their emotional well-being. And I guess it's that we're not robots, you know, that we're not made of titanium, that things bounce off us, that shit happens. And when shit happens, we need to be able to talk about it, to be able to be honest about it, to be able to share it. All those things that David talked about, Murray talked about, and Zane talked about, and I'm sure everybody else is going to talk about, that we need that. And it's all very easy for it to say, we need that. I didn't do it. I didn't do it at all. Yeah, thank you. You know, I knew the research on mental health. I've been doing research on mental health for donkey's years. So I knew all that, but yeah, I didn't do it. When I was confronted with what I thought was a crisis in my life, my only thought was, this is a life I don't want to be in. So my only thought was to get out of it. And I tried to do my best with my mates and my kids, and students that I work with, and doing things like this to try and say, stuff like this can happen to all of us at any point. And let's not just assume that just because someone's in a particular position of power that they're all okay, that everything's all right and everything, that they're a robot. So I think I was asked to talk about the research I'm doing. I'm not going to, because I think that's, for me, less important than actually trying to kind of say that these kind of conversations are really, well, incredibly important to have. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Paul. Look, I think, again, that honesty that you've just come out with and told people your story there is incredible. For someone like with the label professor, then to admit it and to share that with the community, demonstrate that mental health issues have no boundaries. And similar to what Professor Drummond has said and David Kelley has said, and Zane, mental health can touch anybody. Mental health issues, that is. Okay, so thank you very much, Paul. And if you have any questions for Paul, please do put it in the chat, and we will attempt to answer those in some way at the end of the discussion. So now I'd like to introduce my next guest, Seth Westhead. Now, Seth is part of our Wardley Paringa team here at SAHMRI, and he has been looking at the mental health of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, which is a really important part of mental health issues, because it's different from the general population, and it has a particular a nuance that has to be addressed by the Aboriginal people themselves. So Seth is going to offer his perspectives on his health. So I just want to introduce his topic. And it's called We Wear Many Hats. So Seth will talk on his experiences and the different roles he has held throughout his life and how he makes space to centre and ground himself during times of turbulence and pull. Welcome, Seth, and thank you.
Thanks, Michael. And I'd just like to thank everybody else that's spoken before me. It's again, just echoing that it's really important to have these open and vulnerable conversations, and there's a lot of strength in that. So I really respect everybody that shared here today. So as Michael said, my name's Seth Westhead. I'm a research associate with the Wadley Paringa Aboriginal Health Equity Unit at SAHMRI. I'm also a son, brother, partner, friend, community advocate, volunteer and mentor. I have family connections to the Awabakal and Wiradjuri nations of New South Wales and also family connections to the UK. I grew up in regional Victoria on Latchi Latchi country in a town called Mildura, and I've lived now in Adelaide on Kaurna country for the last 7 years. I've lived a total of 25 years, and in that short or long time, however you choose to see it, I've had many roles. I've worn many hats, although it's pretty hard to squeeze into a cap these days. In these different roles, I've had different responsibilities. I've been a carer, an advice giver, a listener, a shoulder to cry on, a hand to pick up, and at times a hand that's pushed down, and that's not an easy one to accept. In each of those roles, I was in a sense an exaggerated embodiment of one or two qualities that form my identity. And in some ways, my roles were reflective of one another, and in others, they were completely contradictory. My responsibilities as a son, as a brother, oftentimes were one and the same and still are, but at other times they couldn't be further apart. They are, however, aspects of the character that I play in this life. These roles have been shaped and guided by many things: my parents, my friends, society, and the media. And it's led me to question things like, is a big brother Bart Simpson the tormentor and tease of his younger sister Lisa? Is a father Will Smith in Bad Boys, standing arms crossed, teeth clenched at the sight of his daughter's first date? And is a man the bloke with a Rambo body and a pick yourself up champ, crying's for sissies type attitude? Well, at least that's what all the movies tell me. I'm a professional and a friend, with times my work commitments taking me momentarily away from being a listening ear or a shoulder to cry on. This tension only realised in a moment of guilt and sadness of I wasn't there. How we reconcile these unavoidable tensions is important. How we find centrality and grounding amidst the Rubik's Cube of life and roles that we flip through every day is fundamental. Because despite all these roles I've played and the roles I will play in my life, I'm not my roles. I'm not Bart Simpson or Will Smith or Rambo. This is a point that many of you will have already come to, or if not, you will come to, I have no doubt. And why? Because our roles change. New roles will appear and others will fall away. The stereotypes that you've been fed or the models that you've watched with a keen eye will pass and become outdated. Over time, some roles will require more effort and others less. You will no longer be a big brother standing up for his siblings in the schoolyard, but the host of family dinners. You'll no longer be the father that drops his children off to school, but the father that walks them down the aisle. And one day you'll no longer be the son that calls interstate to check in on his mother, but the son that cooks her famous recipe in her memory. In my experience, there's one guarantee in this life, and that's change. Unescapable, unavoidable, and indifferent change. Accepting this truth is the most freeing experience I've ever had. To know that who I am is not what I am at a point in time, but is an essence beyond that. This realization allowed me to see beyond my roles and sit in a place of contemplation and construction. A place where I was able to set the undercurrent that would flow through all the roles I have and will play for the rest of my life. This place allowed me to download the codes of morality and value that would serve as touchstones for every journey I made into the matrix. These codes, called truth, love, compassion, empathy, equity, courage, justice, they're my guides. They are the unwavering pillars of Seth Westhead, the research associate, son, brother, partner, friend, community advocate, volunteer, and mentor. When my roles begin to drown me in waves of expectation, responsibility, and obligation, it's the space beyond them that is my lifeboat. It's the space beyond my roles that allows me to breathe, to reset and ground myself in those guiding values. It's not a question of why these words, why these guiding principles, but how. How do I ensure that in all my roles I play, no matter how seemingly different, I employ these core values? Now, this may seem counterintuitive, but the how lies in stillness, in stepping away from my roles, from removing the hats and sitting dread flowings out in the wind. By creating space to sit in silence and go within, I program these core values into my being. Through practices like meditation and mindfulness, I'm able to rest with my unconscious and just be. Now, this may all seem a little bit woo-hoo, and some people may think, you know, easy for you to say, Buffalo Soldier, but I promise you I'm not the only one saying it. Now, when I talk about meditation and mindfulness, I'm not referring to your monk in an orange robe, clutching a fistful of prayer beads, saying Hare Krishna, but I'm talking about the stillness that comes from simply watching your thoughts and not letting them grab you by the short and curlies. Utilizing meditation as a practice has helped me in more ways than I can describe. It's allowed me to learn things about myself I did not previously know and work through some deep-rooted traumas that had been holding me back. It's allowed me to transcend my roles and focus on the man that I want to be. Now, we're all used to hearing consistency is key when we're talking about hitting the weights or trying to nail a backspin through the 6-point sticks. But when it comes to our minds and our spirits, it doesn't quite compute. Why? Well, to me, it appears to be the fact that we don't see our frontal cortex growing 3 inches in the mirror after 6 weeks, or get the satisfaction of watching the pill fly through from 50 meters out. But what if we're able to apply the same mentality to our minds as we did to the gym and on the footy field? We pull ourselves out of bed at 6 a.m. and go for a run or a bike ride or a swim like David.
1 minute. Yeah.
No problem. But when it comes to taking time to sit still, it's harder than calming down a sugar-hyped 4-year-old at a McDonald's birthday party. So what if we did take 20 minutes out of our days to toss off our hats and roles and sit with ourselves, to watch the thoughts pass and let them go? Now, it isn't easy and it can be frustrating as hell, but let me tell you that the satisfaction of a 10 or 15 minute medi is pretty good. It's made me lighter, calmer, and more in tune with how I feel. The tools that meditation's brought to my life are invaluable, and I use them every day. So now, just before I clock off, I want to give you a few references to suss out that have helped me along this path. So get your pens out and write these ones down so you can do a bit of Googling after lunch. You've got the Iceman, Mr. Wim Hof, a destroyer of all things warm and cuddly and a master of breathing meditations. Secondly, you've got Dr. Joe Dispenza, the wizard of visualization and healing from the inside out. And thirdly, Mr. Lodro Rinsler, the Buddhist at the bar and in the office. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Seth. That was very interesting, and certainly some interesting anecdotes. If I might be so bold, it sounds to me like you found yourself. It's sort of what you've described as the core of our Be Well plan. What we actually teach people on our Wellbeing Resilience course. We actually ask them to check who they are and where do they want to go. Just all of those fundamental points that you've mentioned today. So thanks very much, Seth. It was really insightful. And if you have any questions for Seth, please do put them in the chat. And again, we can come back to that at the end. We will do so. And now I want to introduce my last speaker. Now, I've been fortunate enough to hear Nathan actually speak in person. And he's got a really powerful story that he's going to tell you. And I'm not going to take too much of his time and get into it pretty quickly. He's actually an ex-Special Forces member of the Australian Defence Force, and he's a pretty macho bloke, but he's actually willing to talk to you about his feelings today and some of his experiences. So welcome, Nathan. So
thank you very much.
I'll just give you the title of your talk. So Nathan Bolton is actually one of our trainers as well on the Be Well plan here at the Wellbeing Resilience Centre. And his title is The Need for a More Gendered Approach to Mental Health Services. Thank you, Nathan.
No, thanks, Michael. So to begin with, my name is Nathan Bolton. I am a director of Bolton Brothers, a psychology company committed to changing the face of male mental health. We're establishing a psychology practice with a gendered approach to mental health services with a particular focus on male mental health. I also do a lot of keynote speaking, trying to get males and offer males permission to talk, and try to use the experiences of my past, mistakes that I've made, and I guess the lessons that I've learned to break the very stigma that stopped me receiving help when I needed it most. I also sit on the Premier's Council on Suicide Prevention, and with Dr. David Kelley, I'm on the Community Advisory Committee for the South Australian Mental Health Commission. So what got me into where I am today, as Mike just laid on, I am a former Special Operations Engineer. I served two tours of Afghanistan with Australia's Special Forces. In short, my job was to find the search and location of improvised explosive devices, or find the buried bombs hidden in the dirt. As one can imagine, a rather stressful job where I found myself involved in multiple traumatic situations, where my vehicle exploded. Been blown up a couple of times, seen enough death to last me a lifetime. Gunfights, I've seen it, done it. And as one could only imagine, I did not come home from my military service unscathed. I lost many years feeling a far lesser man after my tours. And before I knew it, the confident, proud, and ambitious man that had left for war, I guess, returned home a stranger. And it was in 2015 where it almost cost me my life. At a mate's wedding, of all places. And I was very fortunate to have a mate interrupt me at a time when I needed it most. Now, this all leads into, this entire journey leads in of my recovery post that time, leads into what I do today. And that is about supporting males and helping males. It is more socially accepted for males to reach out and ask for help today than it ever has been. More males actually get out there and actually ask for help more than ever, yet more males are dying as a result of suicide than ever before. So there is something going on. There is something wrong happening with the very system designed to support us. And I remember from my own personal experience, I went through psychologist after psychologist after psychologist trying to sort myself out. Now, I went from a very hyper-masculine environment, and suddenly I walked into these psychologist offices and they're trying to get me to unload, speak empathetically, like empathetic communication, try to speak about my emotions, a whole notion of my own identity that I'd never been and never done that before. For me personally, I wanted to move along the lines of, and like a lot of males do, they want to speak about their goals, they want to speak about their behaviour, they want to speak about their actions. That is where they find it most comfortable. I was a square peg that the psychology system was trying to squeeze me and mould me into their round hole. It was a client-focused or a client-centred treatment instead of a clinical-centred treatment instead of a client-centred treatment. They were trying to fit me around their needs and what they required in order to best help me with my pain. with their treatments instead of going, what do I need? And so this is where it becomes very important with the therapeutic alliance as well. So for males, it's actually been seen that you can get far more out of a strong collaborative relationship with your practitioner as you can with actual treatment modalities themselves. So why are psychologists and psychiatrists pushing so hard on their treatment modalities when, to begin with, what they really need to focus on? What is it that I need? What is it that the actual individual needs? I needed to feel comfortable. I needed to feel safe. And instead, I was pushed into a format that worked for them and not a format that worked for me. Also, then that came into when I went into practices. It wasn't designed, so we go into masculinity, and we can teeter on that. I don't think there's no such thing as toxic masculinity. Masculinity is definitely a part of it's because I know that recent study from Dr. Zach Seidler stated that males are aware that they can speak about their problems or have psychotherapeutic discussions, and it's not going to impact their own masculinity. They don't think it's weak. They don't think it's bad. There's social stigmas, the social construct of masculinity that's really pungent on males. It's about you looking over your shoulder, judging yourself as to what you're actually doing. And so I believe that when it comes to, you should leverage off this idea of masculinity and actually try to break and you modify the traditional approaches to settings and language, and actually allowing the treatment room to not be an examining room that really glorifies with all the certificates of psychs, elitist qualities and their qualifications, but it's more along the lines of what does the male need? What is it that males require in order to feel comfortable, feel safe, and move on? And I know that someone like Dr. Zach Seidler actually said he goes out, he goes into the park, he takes men for a walk, he goes, plays pool, plays table tennis. He does things that fall into the construct of male masculinity in that very culture and leverages it in order to actually allow the individual to be comfortable and actually begin the process. No worries, thank you very much. So, yeah, instead of, I guess, to just try to wrap things up, this is very quick. I guess maybe what's needed for clinicians is for them to more so self-reflect on their approaches to developing working relationships with men and change the narrative that men are the main contributor to the issues faced. So if clinicians actually looked inwards and stopped blaming masculinity in males for why males are not walking, what 43% of males are actually walking out prematurely from services. If we actually stopped for a moment and actually had a look at what's actually going on and created a client-centered focus instead of a clinical-centered focus, I reckon we might be able to support males in a far better stead. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Again, I've heard Nathan talk before, so I sort of heard his story, and it's amazing what the Australian Defence Force people have to go through, and some change their profession, become civilians again, and I imagine that's quite difficult then to fit back into society. So Nathan, I really appreciate your work that you did in the Australian Defence Force, and I wish you the best of luck in settling back into your normal life in the community. Anyway, we've come to the end of all of the sessions of our speakers. And again, if this has triggered anything for anybody, we just want to know that there is Lifeline available if you want to talk to somebody. And that's 13 11 14. And that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, where you can speak to somebody confidentially and anonymously. So if you are triggered by anything, please don't hesitate to call somebody or speak to a friend. So we've heard, I'll just sort of, from my perspective, quickly summarize what we've heard today. So we've heard from Professor Drummond about the pressure of sport. And Australia is certainly a sporting nation. And so almost every child who goes through rowing, netball, football, whatever the sport may be, there are certainly major pressures that we're putting on kids. And we probably need to just be aware of that. Not just kids, as Zane sort of mentioned, it's also on adults. There's a lot of pressure in that. And then there's Zane, who's actually been able to talk about his experiences and break down the stigmas in sports people. But also, he's a role model for everybody in the community. He's seen there. He's been doing radio shows very recently, talking about his mental health. And that's just amazing. So thank you, Zane, for that. And then David Kelley, who shows us that we don't have to be stuck with our position. We can change our job. We can change those pressures. There are solutions. So you might want to think about, am I in the right job? Are there solutions? And what skills can I learn? Such as David's been part of the Wellbeing Resilience Centre, part of our Be Well plan that you might want to consider. So again, thanks, David, and carry on that great role you've got as the Commissioner of Mental Health. And then I'll just keep it in order. So Professor Ward, look, to admit that you've actually attempted suicide must be a very difficult thing to do. And the fact that you're willing to come out, even in your high status, if you like, as a professor, to do that and share that. But you're also doing work with people who are also of high status, those in the medical profession, who clearly need help, and they're the ones helping us, so they also need help. It's certainly a difficult profession to be in. There's certainly a lot of pressures in the medical community. And Seth, look, you showed us that it's important to be yourself and to know what you want. And if you focus on that, you might actually be able to then take a direction where there aren't so many pressures, make your own decisions, have your own autonomy. And you also offer a unique cultural perspective, but you have emphasized you're answering it as you as an individual. So thank you, Seth. And lastly, Nathan, again, the Defence Force certainly represents a sort of macho culture, and it may avoid people talking about their feelings and emotions. So again, you're breaking down that stigma by putting yourself out there. I saw you in an article recently where you did a track that your friend in honor of your friend, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was the documentary on Paul McKay's story.
Yeah.
So obviously a tragic story.
Yeah. So again, you're putting yourself out there and being a role model to people who've been in the forces. And Zaina, I believe you cycled across from Western Australia to Australia.
Yeah, did Perth to Adelaide. I rode my bike, skateboarded, and ran for Breakthrough, raising funds for that. And it was an amazing experience, and heard some different stories from different people, and was able to connect with them. And it was something I'd love to do again. And it was great.
So I just want to thank you all for speaking today. And we're just going to maybe see if anyone wants to put questions in the chat. So I do have one question for, and I'm going to target Murray. I hope you don't mind. We had one of our people in the chat today have asked, is this just males when we're talking about men's health? What about the transgender and intersex community?
Yeah, it's... I think and I think Nathan can also, I think he's alluded to this as well. When we're dealing with men, we're dealing with individuals. So we need to take an approach where we get to know the person, we get to understand the person, and it's not just being a man. It depends on your sexuality and your gender and so forth. It's far more than just just generalizing being a man. You really have to get to know the person, who they are, and where they come from, their background, their socioeconomic status, their history. You know, there's a whole range of different things that come into play, and certainly transgender is an issue that we need to be aware of as well. And I noticed that one of the questions that was coming up, and one of those actually was directed towards Nathan with respect to the information that he was providing. So I'd be interested to also hear what he has to say as well.
Nathan?
Yeah, sorry, I was just responding to one of the messages in there.
Yeah. So I'll come back to you, Nathan. If you ever think about that question.
Yeah, what was the actual, sorry, I just got distracted.
I'll get Maurice to send you the question. I'm just going to go to Zane now.
Oh, sorry.
So, one of the questions that we've got is, how did your teammates and the club react to you being open about your mental health issues?
Yeah, I couldn't speak more highly of the club and my teammates as well. Obviously, it was something that I was quite daunting thinking about it, and it took several years for me to open up to my teammates about it. But I think the reasoning for it was I didn't want anyone else to go through what I was going through, and I know that I was keeping it quiet. So, and statistically, there'd be more blokes in the team that would be going through the same thing. So I didn't want them to just open up and blurt it out to me, but go to their close people, their friends, their family, and open up to them that, yeah, look, I'm not going the best. What do I do, sort of thing. And yeah, that was I didn't want any sympathy or anything from my teammates. I did get a lot of support, which was great, but I just wanted people to feel that this is a normal thing that everyone goes through. A lot of people go through, and then they can open up to their friends, family, and work through it together. But I was always there if people needed support. And I've been lucky and unlucky that I've got a few blokes that I kind of touch base with quite regularly from the footy club that are going through their own journeys. And I appreciate that everyone's is different. What sets me off might not set the next person off, and what helps me doesn't help them, but we're all working through it together. And yeah, it's a tough road at times, but it's good when you're working together as a team and open up and speak to the appropriate people.
Thank you, Zane. Thank you very much. And Nathan, back to you this time. Sorry to cut you off.
No, that's all right. I'm just reading the question. Obviously,
do you want to read the question for us?
Well, so I've got the question that Michael was referring to was based on someone who asked about males and whether this included transgender and intersex people. You say male, do you support transgender men? Well, in the end, it's your life. You choose. If that's the identity that you wished and you uphold and makes you happy, then who are we to judge or question the way you actually want to live your life and what it is? Like in the end, I'm not going to delve in too deeply, but I believe we all have a choice and we all have the ability to make and choose how we want to live our lives. And so who is anyone else to judge and critique the way that you want to best live your own life? So, yeah.
Thanks.
No worries.
I think you answered the question, so thank you. And David, as a mental health commissioner, how can we address some of these issues that have been mentioned today?
Well, look, I think, Mike, having more conversations like this is a really important start. But I guess one of the reflections I'd like to make is that I was involved in the early stages of the men's movement back in the 80s and the 90s. I felt too often that things got caught up in too much talking and not enough action. So I'm also a big proponent for looking at really pragmatic strategies that enable us to act, to do, rather than just talk. I think a couple of our speakers have talked about the idea that sometimes it's easier for men to open up and share when they're doing something. So I would encourage us to be looking at practical opportunities and initiatives that enable men to do something that's about addressing aspects of masculinity, whether that's opposing domestic violence, whether that's supporting young people, whether it's mentoring, positive coaching. They're the sorts of things I think we should also be addressing.
Thank you, David. And my last person I'd like to ask a question to is Seth. Seth, just from a cultural perspective, is there more we can do for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community in mental health?
Mike, I guess I'll answer that by saying I can't speak on a whole culture. I can't speak on 3% of the population of Australia. I can speak on my own experience and my own perspective. And I guess that was the point of my my talk today. It wasn't to try and represent all Aboriginal people or represent all Aboriginal males. Being an Aboriginal male is part of my identity. And I guess the target for my talk today was about going beyond those roles in order to find out what your core values are. I think there's always more we can do. And my answer to that question is probably for people, if they're looking to do more, is to go online at the moment. There's lots of resources out there for people to be able to help different causes. So I guess I'll put that onus on the people that are wanting to do more. If you feel that way, there's plenty of resources out there for you to go and find. So,
yeah. So thanks, Seth, who is part of probably the biggest group of Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islander people who are doing research with their own people. And SAHMRI has its own reconciliation action plan, which I'm a member of that team. So I think every organisation can maybe contribute by at least starting with their own reconciliation action plan. Look, I want to thank all of the speakers and everybody that's come here today to take part. We had over 150 people, and I want to remind you, if you want to know more, you can Google SAHMRI Wellbeing and you'll find the Wellbeing and Resilience Centre there. We do have courses online that you can access, which is called the Be Well Plan. So it's bewellplan.com. We'll put it in the chat for you. And again, just Google SAHMRI Wellbeing, and SAHMRI spelled SAHMRI. All right, so if all the speakers could remain behind, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending. And it's been an amazing session. Thank you very much.